Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started here in a second. We're going to get the recording. Debbie, just let me know when you are ready. Awesome. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. This is the Florida Commission for the Transportation Disadvantaged training webinar regarding our Innovative Service Development Grant program. My name is David Darm. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission, and I'm pleased to present to you all today an overview of our this grant program, getting ready for the next fiscal year and the application process. I here in this room, I'm accompanied by Sherry Powers and Debbie Hall, who are both going to be assisting me in terms of the presentation. Also, Elmer Melendez, who is out there. For those of you who cannot have trouble with your technical side, please reach out to Elmer, and he can try to assist you best he can while we're in the middle of the presentation. When we get to I'll get into more detail when we get into the discussions, but Elmer and Debbie Hall are the two that you'll need to reach out, sending information to if you have any technical concerns. So, and I also want to thank our CTD team, who's also here today, all our project managers, Karen Somerset, and the rest of our team who are here to assist in putting this presentation together, as well as when we go through the implementation. They work very, very hard each year to ensure that we do a really good program for y'all. So with that, I will go ahead and get started into the presentation. So the purpose of today's webinar, we're going to focus on really three objectives. We want to be able to promote awareness of this funding opportunity. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of this. We've done this several years now, so this may be a refresher, and some of the information here might be something you're familiar with. But we do have some changes to this year's application process that we'll get into. So for those of you who think you might have all the information already, think again, we're going to have a lot more discussion on some of the changes here in a little bit. We're also going to provide guidance on how to design applications for this grant program. This has been historically a little bit more of a challenging program for our system because it's involving new creative proposals. Sometimes they can be challenging to gather all the research, to be able to articulate the needs. So our goal for this webinar and the technical assistance that we provide is to give y'all as much clarity in the expectations and assist you where we can appropriately, so that you can ensure that you understand those expectations by the time the proposals are due. And of course, the main goal here today is to focus on what are considered innovative concepts and how to help provide you with the tools you need in thinking about how your proposal meets the expectations of the grant as a whole. This webinar is going to consist of sort of four sections as part of these goals. The first we'll go into is an overview and history of the grant program. Our acronym is ISD, stands for Innovative Service Development Grant. We'll then go into some project concepts of ideas that you can explore as you're developing proposals, things to be thinking about, questions to be thinking about as part of that development. Then we'll proceed to go into the specifics of the application and the evaluation process. We will talk about some of the changes. We'll also go into giving you a few examples of what our process on the end of the review side consists of. I don't know if we have Commissioner Tellez on the call, but we have Commissioner Robin Tellez and a few of our agency advisors, Kent Carroll, Krista Carter, and Gabe Matthews, who will be overseeing the review when we get to that stage. So part of our goal for this presentation is to get y'all a glimpse of what they have to do, as well as us at the staff level, when it comes to evaluating facilitating a fair process for reviewing these proposals. This is a competitive grant, so considering that it's not just your proposal that we're reviewing, but also several others as part of that discussion. And then we will conclude with a chance for those of you who are having questions or thoughts to share. We will try our best to answer questions in this webinar. If we cannot, we will have a follow-up with information on our website and let you know, because some of these questions may be a little tricky for us to answer on the fly. So that is basically the order of this webinar. Going through the rules, this is really focused on, particularly for our community transportation coordinators, CTCs, who are interested in developing proposals, or if you are already currently overseeing an ISD grant for the current fiscal year we're in, this is also an opportunity for you to think about how you're maybe are interested in reapplying. This is designed to really assist you in that consideration. This is going to be the first of 2 webinars. We will have a second one in April, at the beginning of April, that will go in a little bit more depth as far as additional guidance beyond what is provided in today's webinar. We are recording this discussion, so for those of you who are not or have colleagues that were not able to attend, we will post this recording and this PowerPoint presentation on our website shortly after this meeting. We ask that everyone who's participating, please mute your lines and take advantage of the chat box feature. Elmer and Debbie will be looking through the chat box as questions come in. I may stop at one point or 2 points in the presentation just to check in with Elmer to see if there's any burning questions, but we'll try to answer the questions in the order they received. And then again, we are going to focus solely on the Innovative Service Development Grant Program. We'll not be able to answer any questions outside of that specific topic. All right. I will move it. I guess I'll stop here for a second. Elmer, is everything all right on the chat box?
So far, so good.
Great. All right, so we'll go into an overview of what this grant program entails. So just a little background. For starters, this has been a grant that's kind of had a evolution over the last, I guess, 7 years now. When we started this program, it used to be called the Mobility Enhancement Grant. We had about approximately 2 million or so that we would distribute each of the years between 2016 and 2019 to support innovative projects that were going to enhance mobility. And I think back then, especially, there was a lot of interest in the use of transportation network companies or TNCs as part of that exploration, because that was becoming more and more of a phenomenon in our system. But over the years, some of the objectives have evolved. In 2019, the legislature appropriated 10 million through a program known as the Multi-Use Corridors of Regional Economic Significance, or better known as MCORs. And that really laid the foundation for what we have today as far as the objectives, which I'll get into in a second. But with that 10 million that was recurring, we had 2 years of that funding to try to expand what was originally under the Mobility Enhancement Grant. But then when the pandemic hit, beginning in 2020, the Florida legislature made the decision to repeal the MCORS funding. That was a larger sweeping legislation, but as part of that, we also lost the funding that year. So it was not funded for 1 year. And then getting now to the present day, the previous legislative session in 2022 appropriated 4 million for the current fiscal year we're in. So from July 1 of 22 to ending June 30th of this current year, we had 4 million appropriated to the commission, and then we in turn awarded that 4 million to 8 projects for the current fiscal year we're in. So now where we are presently is, unfortunately, because of the timing, the legislative session this year is a little later than we had last year. We're in this situation where things are still up to see where the legislative process goes. So this is emphasizing that this discussion is completely contingent on what the legislature does with the General Appropriations Act. However, we understand that the CTCs and those developing these proposals need sufficient time to develop their proposals, to get the guidance from us. So we wanted to go ahead and start this process early, but we will emphasize throughout our discussions that everything that we're looking at in the proposals will be contingent on what the Florida legislature appropriates, as well as what the governor approves in the final budget. But as it stands today, the governor has recommended 6 million for this grant program for fiscal year 23-24. So that would be, if the legislature approves that, that would begin on July 1st of 2023 and end on June 30th, 2024. So as part of that, being that we fall within under the executive branch, our qualifications that we're going to discuss in this webinar are aligned with what is in the governor's recommended budget for this upcoming year. So we are right now looking at a hypothetical 6 million for the pot. Now, if that changes during the legislative session, of course, we would have to adjust that process. But for the time being, that's the process we're going to work under. The innovative service development goals. This is the goals that were similar to what was in originally the NCORS statute. And it entails one of three that a project could support. One of meaning it could be multiple goals. But the first one being the project needs to demonstrate a way to increase access to TD services. And that could mean identifying maybe a service gap, such as maybe days of the week or hours of the day that services are not being provided, where a CTC may want to expand those services, maybe to focus on, say, job applicants who working late shift hours or during weekend hours. That's one concept. Another aspect of increasing access could be focusing on underserved population, like individuals with developmental disabilities or a certain low income population that maybe you identified in your service area as not being adequately served under the current trip and equipment grant. Second, a goal is to consider enhancing cross-county and regional mobility. This is something we at the commission hear a lot about especially during legislative session, that there is a desire to see more expansive mobility options. Of course, as a state, we're growing ever by the year. So considering what options, maybe how TD could be supporting more of those cross-county mobility options as part of this grant. And then third is considering reducing difficulty of a TD rider to be able to access a fixed route public transportation system if it's available in their community. As you know, that is something that we've emphasized throughout our program, is that by utilizing fixed route services, especially for those who can physically access a fixed route when it's appropriate, that saves the state money and allows for more opportunity to serve other more severe needs in the community with paratransit services. So those are some three goals to consider as part of the development of your proposals. So what is innovative? This is something that we get constantly questions about, and it's of course not something that is as easy and cut and dry as maybe some other of the issues that we've dealt with in our program. So one of the ways to consider innovation, a lot of times people, their misperception, they think immediately we're talking about technology. For this purpose, we are focusing on services, not capital equipment or technology. It's not to say that technology can't be used, but the focus is really looking at it through a service from the perspective of a customer. How does this project add value to the customer's experience? So another way to look at it, the definition that Google provides defines as innovative as making changes to something that is established, especially by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. So, of course, in this case, it's services. So how is your service proposal going to add value to what is currently being provided in your service area through the TD program? Here are some examples of maybe how to look at this through the lens of the customer's perspective. As I mentioned earlier, we have seen a lot of interest over the years in utilizing non-traditional providers of our system, including TNCs, that could potentially provide a more efficient services, reducing wait times for riders to get picked up for a paratransit trip. That's one aspect to potentially consider. Again, you could also consider it from an added value of if you want to expand services that are not being offered, such as on late hours of the day or during the weekends, to get people to certain destinations. Looking at the specific populations that maybe are not being served adequately because of the limitations of your existing TD program, that's a potential way to consider adding value by testing a new way of serving that particular segment of the TD population. Another aspect would be looking at your cost, and cost is not just the cost from a rider's perspective, but also the cost from this being a state program. What's the benefit of the state taxpayers? How can you demonstrate potentially of saving costs in the long run for the TD program or for the state as a consideration of adding value, not just from a customer, from a rider perspective, but from the state funding perspective. So those are just some considerations as far as ways that could potentially be adding value to your existing TD program. Who could participate in this program? As it stands right now, the only eligible entity that can apply directly for the funding are CTCs defined under Chapter 427.011 as a direct grant recipient. However, that CTC can also subcontract with non-traditional providers like TNCs or taxis, or work with another partner, maybe partner with another CTC as part of the project. Even if that CTC is a direct recipient, it doesn't mean necessarily that the funding is solely for the CTC to use. They could be able, potentially, if it supports the project goal, could subcontract for those services. Also considering partners as part of the proposal, we do encourage strongly to consider, if you're, especially if you're looking at serving maybe a specific segment of the TD population, such as people with developmental disabilities, consider the human service agencies in your community that are serving that population as well. They could be potentially advantageous to helping get the word out about your project or connecting riders to the project. So those are some considerations in addition to just being a direct recipient of the funding. As always, riders must be, just like with our standard trip and equipment grant expectations, they must be considered TD eligible to be able to qualify for being served under the project. So meaning if you want to focus on, let's say on veterans, you want to look at veterans in the community that maybe that are not being served as adequately, simply just being a veteran is not going to be a sufficient criteria. They have to be determined as transportation disadvantaged, just like you would with your trip and equipment grant. Going over some of the requirements. Now, this is where things get a little bit different from where we've had in the past. So for starters, we have consistently said that a project can support multiple ISD grant goals. However, one of the challenges that we have is some of the projects we've seen in the past has gotten where they try too many things at once. So we want to really emphasize this year to narrow that to being a singular purpose. Now, for example, you could have two goals like we put it here in this slide. Again, going back to the veterans, you could support increasing access to veterans and also promote cross-county trips to, say, going to the VA hospital. Those would be two ISD grant goals, but they are complementing each other. They're supporting each other. Where we want to move away from is seeing projects where you say maybe you want to do uh, focus on a particular segment of the population and you want to do a direct connect to a fixed route, but they don't really seem to be supporting one another. They seem to be two different projects. What we will encourage this year is that if you have, say, maybe two project concepts, you can apply for two different projects, and we'll get into that in a minute. But think about it as trying to make sure that the project is really focused and clear as to what it's trying to achieve. So when we are evaluating it, we understand clearly what the expectation of a project is. Another aspect of this year that's changed is we are applying caps. This is based on what was recommended in the governor's budget for this year. So for a single service area, that means if you're a CTC of a county, that would be a single service area. If you're a CTC, the multi-county service area, say Orange, Osceola, Seminole, then it would be applied as a considered a single service area, and a grant project for that would be capped at 500,000, meaning you can apply a request up to $500,000 for that project for a single service area. However, if your project is looking to expand cross-county regional mobility beyond what you currently provide. So if you're a single county, that would be multiple counties. If you're a CTC of a multi-county service area currently, you would have to show that you're going to go beyond your existing service area. Then you can apply up to $1 million is where it's capped for a regional multi-county service area project. So I hope that makes sense. As far as the caps go. And again, for this year, unless there is changes in the legislative General Appropriations Act, we are encouraging that if you have, say, a couple of different project ideas that you want us to consider, then apply for them separately. So if you want to have a project focusing on people with developmental disabilities, but you're also interested in exploring a fixed route access point, unless they show that they connect, we recommend that you apply as those as two separate projects so that we can be able to evaluate them based on them individually. All projects must include a 10% local match that is consistent with our standards of the Trip and Equipment Grant. And again, these services must be focused on direct services to TD riders, not capital equipment or any other kinds of eligible expenses for this grant. Okay, so as far as this year's timeline, we are looking at an earlier deadline so that we can be able to have sufficient time of reviewing applications. So we are, as of right now, putting the deadline to be April 14th. Now, of course, if the legislative session causes some changes, we would have to update you all on that process because the session will be going on still during that time. But for all intents and purposes, for this application process that we've put together, we unless receiving notification from us, the current deadline is April 14th of this year for new proposals for the new fiscal year. Again, funding is contingent on the legislature determination of including this in the Appropriations Act and as well as governor's approval. If something changes, we will of course keep everyone up to speed and try to adapt the best we can. As far as our services expectations for this new funding, assuming the legislature and the governor approve it, we would still be operating under a state fiscal year timeline. So all the proposals that we're considering, the earliest that they could be able to execute their grants would be July 1st of 2023 when the new fiscal year begins. So, and as part of that process, grantees must submit invoices each month that in order to be eligible for reimbursement. In other words, just because the commission awards a CTC grant funding doesn't mean they get the funding direct payment until they demonstrate in their invoice that a service was provided and is approved by the commission, just like we do with our trip and equipment grant. And then uh, as part of the requirement for grants that we do approve, we will require one presentation at least to be provided to the commission board before the end of next fiscal year. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute as far as that expectation. This will allow the commissioners and advisors and other stakeholders to be able to hear progress basically of what the project's been doing since we approved the funding. I'm going to stop here for a second. Sherry, was there anything as far as that requirements overview of the program before we get into the technical assistance side of it that I might have missed?
I think you hit it as far as I know.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of information, so I have Sherry here to keep me honest to make sure I cover everything. As far as our, we want the best ideas. I think that's if there's a big takeaway from this discussion, is we really do want to give you all as much clarity and opportunity to get the best ideas possible. And at the same time, it is a competitive grant. So there needs to be some expectation of fairness, that we're not going to have any favoritism towards one project over another, that they will all be evaluated on the similar expectation and criteria. So with that, we are functioning under what's called the cone of silence, with the exception of what we're going to be providing to y'all through these forums. We are not going to be communicating as staff or as commissioners with CTCs on projects outside of the public domain. And so part of those opportunities, that's why we really strongly encourage y'all to take advantage of these webinars, as well as the early bird application deadline, to give you a chance to have as much opportunity for feedback from us. So beyond just today's webinar, we will also be in March, on March 17th. We will have an early bird deadline for those of you who are wanting to submit a proposal early and receive feedback on that proposal. Highly, strongly recommend that you take advantage of that. That also will give us a lot of insight as to maybe potential common areas of challenges where we can come back at a second webinar in April to discuss those, so that again, the goal is that that we don't want to just benefit one CTC. We want to make sure that this information is widely available for all applicants to be able to take advantage of these technical assistance opportunities. Here is a schedule, of what we're looking at for this year's application process. So we have today the training webinar. We did release the application packet back on last Friday. So if you have not yet had a chance to look at that, please do. We have posted that also on our website, so you can get all the pertinent information there. Next big event we're going to have, I've highlighted this here as kind of a new feature this year, is having presentations by the current grants. We have 8 projects currently that we're funding under the ISD for the current fiscal year. And we will be having, we'll split up a 2-day session presentations from those grant recipients. And we have reached out to them. We will have 4 presentations on March 15th, which is in conjunction with our commission meeting in Tallahassee. We will provide a virtual option for that. So for those of you who cannot physically be there, you will still be able to have access to that discussion, and it will be recorded so folks can hear it. And then we'll have the second half be on March 22nd, the following week, for the other 4 projects. And this is really important. We want to emphasize that for the current projects, if you are intending If you're one of those 8 projects that is interested in reapplying for next year, please note that those presentations will be part of the evaluation process. So it's important, imperative that your presentation be as thorough and as detailed as you can, to be able to help us, understand even the challenges you're experiencing as transparent as possible. Helps us to know when we are looking at the time for the project being reapplied, how things are going. It's a chance for having a direct dialogue between our commissioners and the project owners of those CTCs. Again, we're having the early bird deadline on March 17th, so St. Patty's Day. So don't forget that deadline. That is very important. You can submit anytime before that deadline for an early bird, but we will not be accepting any more early bird applications after March 17th. And we will try to make a turnaround time within 10 days of that to those proposals on ways they could potentially improve it, or any potential questions that we may have that need to be answered before the final deadline. We will then have a second webinar on the week of April the 3rd. That will be a chance again to answer questions. We'll go into some more details about what we're seeing from the early birds and from some of the common challenges that we've had in the past that will help provide additional guidance. And then again, the deadline is going to be April 14th for applications to be received for the new fiscal year. I wanted to put up there and emphasize that the legislative session date is ending on May 5th. So we have to watch that process in addition to our own following our own procedures of this application process. So if something dramatically changes, of course, we will notify everyone and have to adapt if that is necessary. And then our review committee will be meeting in the beginning of May to review the applications that we receive, have an evaluation of those proposals, and we'll post those at least a week before the next commission meeting that will be on May 25th. Ideally, if everything goes according to plan, and the legislature, assuming the legislature did pick it up and everything hasn't changed in the Appropriations Act, then we are looking at having May 25th being the date that the commission would award grant funding for the new fiscal year. That is an overview of the schedule for this grant application process. Now we're moving into some ideas to consider for project ideas. Again, consider as we're going through this, take the perspective of the individual writer and what is the value to them. What are some barriers that you see that you're interested in addressing, transportation barriers for those individuals, whether it's accessing a healthcare site, a workplace, social recreation. Consider where your local TD program is falling short in meeting those needs. Is it because, we hear often in the past that the medical demands tend to take up so much attention that it's hard to be able to explore serving other trip purposes. That's an example where you could potentially cite a need that there's limitations to the trip and equipment grant. Always, when you're presenting a proposal, to demonstrate and show evidence of what you've gathered to demonstrate why you believe this project needs consideration for funding and how that is going to demonstrate adding value with a new service. So those are some things to consider from the writer perspective. On the other side of it, think about also who your potential partners or other players that you need to work with in developing this project. Yes, the CTC is going to be responsible as the direct recipient, but we strongly encourage that you bring in other partnering agencies, whether it could be a planner, it could be a human service agency, it could be a local business or educational program. If you're going to target a specific population and there's some partnering agencies that you want to be a part of the discussion, then we strongly encourage you to solicit their help in developing your proposals, and making sure that those projects define those roles. It could be including letters of support. It could be showing how those partnering agencies will market the service to get the target population you want to serve. So just some things to consider. Also consider, if very much emphasize that if you are going to incorporate TNCs or non-traditional providers, please describe how that project is going to utilize that. Simply just saying we're going to use it isn't going to cut it for us. We need to have as much specific information of how that service is going to be coordinated with those entities whenever possible. And then very important also is the data. Considering data, this is something that our organization has strongly been utilizing over the last few years when it comes to evaluating our programs, our projects, is considering what data that you have that you can present. We have our invoice data that's going to be part of the evaluation, but we also encourage you to include any other data statistics that you can be able to help us understand how this addresses the need of your community. Considering also that, the advantage of having this grant program is to test new services. This is a chance to consider that, you may want to try something new, but obviously considering the risks or the limitations under your existing TD program, this is a chance for you to try something innovative as considered a pilot project. Ideally, when we look at these projects, we understand that a lot of times they might take longer than 12 months. However, we also have to work within the confines of a state fiscal year budget. So we are going to be considering projects that were funded for this year. If they're reapplying, they will get first consideration in the evaluation process, to seeing that, that because we've as a commission have invested in those projects, they will get a little bit, I would say the first review of this year's evaluation. But of course, if those projects still have to have a demonstration of need that is worth continuing the investment if the commission does have the fortune of being able to continue getting the funding again next year. So those are just some considerations when it comes to consideration of testing a new service. Ideally, we'd like to see these projects be more than 1 year, but we also have to work within that 12-month period. So before I go into the application process, is there anything, Sherry, that I missed as far as project ideas, innovations, considerations on that front?
I don't think you've missed anything. Elmer, did you want to stop for questions? He was saying, I think there's some questions.
There's several questions. I'm gonna call them in the order that they came in.
Great.
I'm gonna have the person unmute themselves so they can present the question. Mr. Silvers, you're up.
Hi, Ross. I assume that's Ross.
Yes.
Ross,
Okay.
you're still muted.
All right, well, I will ask the question for him so you can answer and everybody can benefit. Will current year ISD projects be evaluated equally with new project grants requests?
And Sherry's here to correct me if I misspeak. What we're doing is that we'll give on the evaluation first consideration to the existing projects. However, the evaluation criteria will be the same for both existing year projects and new projects. I should probably put a caveat though, is that we also do expect, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, I will get into this, that we need to have invoice data. The more data that we can get from those existing ISD grant projects from the current year invoices will help us with that evaluation. For new projects, what we would look at is the trip and equipment grant invoice data. So we are looking at both grants invoices, but because we have the current structure is that we are as good as we can with the data we have. We obviously want to look at the current year ISD grant invoices as part of that evaluation process. But as far as the broad evaluation rubric that is included in the application packet, that rubric is equally being applied to the current year projects that are reapplying as well as new project proposals. Sherry, did I make that clear or get that accurately?
Sounds clear to me, David. Thank you.
Ross says it's clear to him.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. That's a good question.
All right, the next question is from Heidi Villa. Heidi, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, so David, my question is, if we have a group of TD eligible citizens that have been to like one of our LCB meetings and made public comment that in which they highlighted a need and that need matches the innovative service need proposed, would that be the kind of good example to like put in an application to show proof of need? And be it obviously that need is being met in a new and different way.
Sure, I think so what I'm hearing, just so I understand, you're saying any kinds of maybe public feedback you get through LCB forums that obviously you would, the more consistent feedback, the better. If you just have one writer that's getting up and saying something, maybe a little harder case to prove, but what I'm hearing you say is like if you have testimonials consistently of many people coming up requesting a service, that could be definitely data to present as evidence of need.
Yes.
And
We
then, you know, in
actually,
addition to that, I'm sorry, surveys or any other kinds of customer feedback that you can pull, that would also be another element to consider. Kind of similar where you're getting direct feedback from people who are interested in stakeholders.
Okay, great. And we'd had some people that came to one of our LCB meetings that was a couple of people from an organized group that were representing the group, but they said everyone in their group had the same issue come up. So we kind of had a group come to us and make public comment about some needs that just weren't getting met. So it wasn't just one individual. So, and that's a great idea. We'll probably send out a survey to be able to gather more information. Thank you.
Was there anything else, Sherry, that you wanted to add to that?
I think the only thing I was thinking when you were speaking about the surveys is I'm sure you've read that there's a limit on the size of the application package. So I'm not sure I don't think we would want each individual survey response, but more of a summary of what that response was or represented. Just so you don't get into the problem with the size limit of the application.
So summary, basically like summary statistics or summary of feedback, however you wish to gather that feedback, just so it would show that there was evidence that there was an effort to gather that feedback. Great, good, really good questions. What do we got? We had a third one, I think.
We do have a last one is from Miss Kelly Brooks. Kelly Brooks, you're on.
Good afternoon. Hey, my
Good
question.
afternoon, Kelly.
How are you?
We're great.
All right, so my question is, if you're a CTC for a multi-county service area, can you apply focus on just one of those counties, or does your project have to be across the board, including all 4 counties that you serve?
You can focus on an area, like let's say I'm going to just give a fictitious scenario. You have your case, you have 4 counties, but you have maybe one particular area of the county that's been challenging to serve, or maybe a specific activity that you want to access, like a grocery store or an employment center, a medical center, whatever that might be, that I think would be acceptable to us. Obviously, you need to demonstrate, all the other evidence, but it just depends on what your interest is. But if you're focusing on an area, I would say a specific area, just demonstrate where there is either a lack of service or a challenge of providing a service or a population, whatever that need is, really clearly articulate that in the proposal.
Perfect. Thank you.
Did you?
Nope, that was it.
Nope. Great questions. All right. I was worried about curveballs, but we'll see. We still got a more webinar to go, so we may get some more. Are we good, Elmer, to go forward with the application process?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to go into the instructions of the, and this is where I may need Sherry to jump in when I miss something, because there's quite a lot to pieces to this, but we just tried to summarize it here. Very important. This has been a problem in the past we've had, is to please review the entire manual and make sure that you cover every question in that manual. If you don't have a completed application, we will not even look or have a discussion of that proposal when it comes time for the review subcommittee. So that's really, really important, is to double check and make sure that you've covered everything. Of course, identify all the important elements of the proposal, the service areas, the key staff that are going to be overseeing the project proposed start date, and the funding requested with the local match. Be sure to break that out when you do show the request. That has been something I think our team has had to sometimes do our own inferences of what was the match versus what was our side of the portion of it. So please try to break that down as best you can. Obviously, looking at the description, the project scope that's the meat of the proposal. So that's where you get into the evidence of need and identifying how the services will support the grant goals. So that's the section that I'd say is very important in being as clear and focused as possible. And then, as Sherry mentioned earlier, the application packet is limited to 15 pages, so no more than 15 pages. That's including appendices, and supporting documents. We've had a few proposals that would in the past would attach an entire TDSP as part of it. That's really challenging for us to be able to sort through. So try the best you can to understanding that we do need to be thorough, but also understand that we're reviewing sometimes 10 to 15, sometimes some years we've gotten 20 proposals. The amount of pages makes it really challenging when it's over that. So we are not accepting any more than 15 pages a limit. All right, enlisting help. Again, this was kind of what we talked about earlier, is thinking about who are your partners. If you're going to look at maybe coordinating in a regional project, multi-service area project, then consider, are you going to be coordinating with the CTC in the neighboring area? How will the eligibility be determined? Because we understand, some of the CTCs have different eligibility criteria. So how is that going to be coordinated if you're going to be pursuing a regional project? Remembering that if you're going to identify partnering agencies, please include as descriptive as you can how that role is going to work for that partner, any kinds of support documentation. We've had projects sometimes that will say, we're going to work with ABC provider, but we didn't have any evidence as to what that role was going to be. And it makes it difficult for us when we're reviewing, multiple different proposals. The ones that have the more supportive documentation are going to have a stronger advantage in the competitive side of a application. So, and again, if you're using TNCs, please show how that is going to enhance the service quality, the efficiency, or the costs. Be as specific as you can on that side. If you expect a delay of services, especially if you're a newer project, we understand that a lot of these things don't start right on July 1st. In fact, I think we'll be having that conversation with some of the current year projects starting a little bit later. So as long as if you're anticipating that, please try to explain that in the proposal as to why it could be getting a chance to get contracts in place with the vendor, subcontracted provider. It could be marketing, eligibility, whatever that may be. Just please try to describe that in your proposal. Another thing to consider is the budget, and I'll show in the next slide, we'll show a sample budget that we've provided. But when you're requesting funding, don't just say we want $500,000 and that's what we need to be able to do the service. Show how you break down that expense. What made you arrive at that amount for this proposal? I think I've covered already letters of support, encouraging, identifying where other partnering agencies are going to be involved. And again, if you're a multi-service area, existing multi-service area, and you want to just be able to provide a project in your existing service area, it still would be $500,000 of a cap unless you're expanding that to beyond the current service approved service area. This is a example of a budget. You do not have to use exactly this sample spreadsheet, but whatever you use to show us, this is like elementary school arithmetic again. It's like, what's your arrival of what amount you need to be able to do the project. We need to see your work as to what's your breakout of expenses. Including also your rate calculations. So what it basically is the logic behind your request. Remembering that, we have seen projects that would say in their budgets that they were intending to just use contracted providers, that all their expenses would be under that. But that's not usually enough information for us to go with. So Sherry, is there more I can add on the guidance as far as the budget? I know that has been in the past a challenge for our review subcommittee when they're trying to understand the logic behind the requests.
The only thing that I would add, which kind of we stated in the manual, that we would prefer that not be the case, because the first question we get is you have some type of expense to administer or have oversight or implement that project. So when it's just one line item, there was a lot of discussion about that in the past. So if you do that, if that's something that you are stuck to, we need some justification on how the other expense items are going to be covered. Maybe that will ease some of the subcommittee's minds on that, but we need some kind of justification. That was all I was going to say.
Great. We're now going to go into some of the common pitfalls that we've seen in the past. This is one of those things where we all in the world, sometimes we like to think that everybody knows our program backwards, forwards, inside and out with acronyms. But, think of it as the review subcommittee. They may have familiarity with aspects of our program, but you should write these proposals as if you're introducing this for the first time to them. So some of the challenges was like, it's this balancing act. You need to be able to be clear and consistent in your description of your proposal, but sometimes we'll also get where we have too much information and it gets really confusing as to what the objectives are. It's all over the place, and it makes us at the staff and the review subcommittee level having to make inferences on what the project is trying to do. That is really, really a struggle for us in the past. When it comes time for review, if we have 6 really, really strong proposals that are really articulate, and a couple other proposals that are maybe something that we like but are confused on, that's going to be work against the application and the review process. So try to be as clear, give as much information as you can to support your claims, but also being aware that the audience is, we have, these are people with their own lives and busy jobs. This is not their full-time job. And so try to make it as helpful to their view as possible. Use the format that we give you in the application. Sometimes in the past, we've had proposals that would not follow the format. They would be completely separate, and that would make it where we basically would have to make a decision as to whether that was an acceptable application. So please do not do that. It will not be considered as part of the discussion. So be mindful of the terminology and the acronyms you use. At least try to break out the acronym at least once as to what it means. Case in point, what you see here on this bullet point, trip and equipment grant. If you want to say T&E grant, at least articulate in the beginning of the proposal what that means. Data, I will get into in a second a little bit more, but remember that we will be looking at invoice data, both in the trip and equipment grant and the ISD grant, if that is applicable. And that means that when you make claims in the proposal and the data shows something different, then it's going to go as a challenge as to why. There may be a reason why the invoice data is saying a certain thing, but be mindful of what you do submit in your invoices will be reviewed as part of the evaluation. Again, think about also the inconsistencies, incorrect calculations. That's something that we've seen where we're having to do the calculations on our end to understand how you arrived at those numbers. So those are some common pitfalls that we've seen in the past. So ways to get around these traps is, remember again, to be specific. I kind of feel like I've addressed a lot of this. Being specific and to the point, but also being sure that the information is thorough. Allow enough time. I think a lot of the errors, honestly, that we've seen can be attributed to rushing a proposal. Now, I'm a natural procrastinator myself, and I know how it gets when you're down to the wire and you're trying to get everything done. You miss details even when you're as thorough as you can be. So try to allot yourself enough time to draft the proposal. Again, take advantage of the early bird, even if the early bird proposal isn't, say, perfect, at least it gives you a chance to get some feedback on your main concepts. So that by the time you do get to the deadline, you have done a thorough job at trying to get all the points covered. I think I've addressed a lot of these other issues. I'm going to double check your math. If you're going to identify a specific group, please try to identify how that is going to be addressed in the TD eligibility. Simply saying you're going to serve APD clients is not enough information for us to go on. We need to know the APD clients that you have identified are in fact those that have been also determined TD eligible, needing of transportation, not getting transportation needs met in their existing waiver program. That's an example to consider when you're putting a proposal together. Okay, applications will be reviewed based on the evaluation criteria that is in the application packet. Again, we will be looking at the invoice data. I highlighted that so that it can be very clearly understood. That is going to be a part of it in addition to what is in the application itself. And the review subcommittee will be meeting in May to review them, to discuss it, to develop the recommendations, and we will have those recommendations published by 7 days before the commission meeting. So by May 18th, we usually post that as a part of the commission meeting packet with a spreadsheet. So we will have that information for folks to look at in time for the commission meeting on May 25th. Again, everything is contingent on the legislature and the governor. So by kind of going into this process, we will obviously have to update folks if there is changes in that process before May 25th. But for all intents and purposes, that is the timeline we're going to work on. Lastly, before we conclude and get into the feedback portion, we did want to give a few examples, fictitious proposals, of just to give you guys a glimpse about what we see when we're doing a review. So I've got 3 proposal examples to provide. Let's look at the first one as an example of a new proposal. So this would be a proposal that under the fictitious scenario we have not funded. They want to support cross-county trips to a VA hospital. So it's a CTC that has a VA hospital that's not in their service area, and they've identified in their county approximately 200 vets are living in the county, with 20% of those vets being potentially transportation disadvantaged. And that was a source in their TDSP as part of that evidence of need. They've identified that their trips, they are providing trips to the VA hospital, but it's only limited to Tuesdays and Thursdays. So under this fictitious proposal, they would ask that this funding would support expanding of access 5 days a week of VA trips for estimated 500 trips for the next year, 520 trips for the next year. And the goal is to try to serve new TD riders who are going to the VA. So that's an example of a proposal that I would say is strong. And in the evaluation side of it, looking at it, you see that there are 2 ISD grant goals that were identified. So that's both increased access for TD veterans as well as cross-county mobility to a specific location. It cites data, county stats as far as the evidence of need. On our evaluation, we looked at the invoice data of their trip and equipment grant. Again, this is a new project, so we would only have the invoice data from the trip and equipment grant to go with. And it did show and demonstrate that there were trips going to the VA at the address they provided on Tuesdays and Thursdays, with about 10 unique riders identified in that invoice data. The proposal outlines very clearly the goals and what they would want to do with the new funding. It is all the elements of what we've asked for were provided in the proposal. So again, this is an example scenario of a strong proposal that has all the elements that we need to basically say from the review subcommittee side, this seems to be worthy of consideration for funding. Now I'm going to go into a different scenario of what we would say arguably a weak proposal. And under this fictitious scenario, this one wants to provide new TD services in a rural area of the county. So this is not funded under the current ISD grant under this scenario. CTC claims that they're providing limited trips in the area due to this rural area they're struggling to provide services because their urbanized area is requiring much higher demand of service. So they want to provide trips to that rural area under this grant. They also want to provide a connector to a fixed route in their urbanized area, and they want to be able to provide 500 trips to the rural area that they've identified in their proposal. Here's some problems with this proposal. And of course, this is very, very high level. There's obviously more that goes into reviewing, but just on the surface, here's some of the issues with this. So it identified, like the last proposal, it identified 2 ISD grant goals. So in this case, it was identifying they wanted to do increased access to a rural area, as well as doing a connector to a fixed route. But they never explained in the proposal how each of these relate to each other. So, we could make assumptions to say, well, you're trying to get rural residents to go to the connector to get into the urbanized area. But if it's not clearly articulated, then we don't really know how they connect, how they relate. Another issue was that this scenario did not include evidence of need. What's the estimated ridership that they want to serve in that rural area? Is there a specific location or trip purpose that they're trying to meet? Are they trying to go to a commute to a workplace in the urbanized area? Are they trying to go to a healthcare site? Those are very important information that needs to be articulated. And then, and here's the the invoice data shows that 500 trips were occurred in that rural area under the trip and equipment grant last year. So on this, based on this scenario, it would appear one could consider this as, oh, this looks like that they're trying to supplement existing trip and equipment grant trips under the Innovative Service Development Grant. That's something that we put clearly in our manual, is that's not what this grant funding is intended to do. So it needs to articulate, yeah, you might be providing trips to a rural area and your invoice data supports that, but why is the innovative grant important to add value? Not just that you supplement existing trips under your trip and equipment grant, but specifically, how does this testing something new? These are things to consider when you're developing a proposal. Again, they make a claim as to their estimated trip count, but they didn't explain in their proposal why that number occurred. Where was the 500 trips? You know, what are they thinking? Are they identifying specific customers that they think will need those 500 trips? What's the logic behind that estimate? So this is an example of a proposal that would likely be not recommended for funding based on the limited information or lack of information in their proposal. And then finally, we want to do one other scenario. This one I would say is a pretty decent proposal, but it has missing elements. And this is something that I'd say is very common in discussions, that we may have some good concepts, but there's missing elements that makes it challenging for us, especially when we are weighting these proposals against other considered proposals on the table. So in this particular scenario, this is a project that wants to continue ISD grant funding for another year. So we, as the commission, approved this project for the current fiscal year to do job training and employment. But this year they want to add, for the next year, they want to add a new element, actually two new elements. They want to include TNCs to improve on-time performance by 5%. So logically, that makes sense. You want to have get people to work at faster on time. That makes sense logically. But there's a problem. They didn't include any data to show the current on-time performance. So it's challenging for us to evaluate where they arrived at that 5%. They also want to expand services to students in a local college, and they identified a survey with the partnering college that identified 50 students potentially that would benefit from this service. So that's an area of strength, I would say, for this proposal, because it showed that their expansion was with data supporting it, like they were identifying an additional need that's falling still under the scope of employment and job training, but had a different element to it by focusing on the students. And lastly, this project looks at their target goal is to provide for the new year, for the next year, 20,750 trips with this new funding. So when we look at these proposals, again, we will look at the invoice data, and in this case, we have ISD grant data in our ability to evaluate. And based on this, we saw that, well, we have 6 months worth of invoice data for the current fiscal year. And that indicated that it was about over half of almost half of their funding has been spent in the 6 months for this current project. Why that's important is because sometimes we will get proposals that will, request funding, but based on the invoice data, may not be drawing down those dollars or providing as many services. And there could be reasons for that we will understand if there is a explanation. But when you're going to ask for funding for a new fiscal year, and your invoice data doesn't quite match with what is being proposed, that's going to potentially be a challenge for us in consideration, especially when we're looking at there's a limited amount of money that's on the table for this year. 6 million can be easily gobbled up if when you're looking at all the proposals combined together. So those are just some ideas to think about. You know, again, these were fictitious scenarios, but they were based on some elements of truth. Some of the conversations that we've had at the subcommittee level, when we're crossing through and seeing where the strengths and the weaknesses are in a given proposal. Before we get into the public feedback, was there anything else, Sherry, that I neglected on the application for this year?
I just want to stress the importance of following and I think you said it, the format of the application. In that package, there is a fillable scope, and they're very specific questions, and it's a flow. We've seen it in the past where the information may be there, but they didn't answer the question there, and we had to dig through and find. So we've tried to make it where the questions and answers will present the project kind of all in a consistent format for the subcommittee members to review and get a good feel for what their questions and answers are. Not trying to spend their time searching through for different questions and answers, if that makes sense. So please take advantage of that. And I think that was really it. I think the biggest question we ask when we're preparing the scopes or when we're looking at these things is what David said. What is the project trying to test? So keep that in mind when you're filling that out. What are you testing? What is it that we need to highlight? And that's really it. Karen, if I'm missing anything, let us know.
I think.
All
we're
right,
good.
great. We appreciate everyone's time. I know this one was a little longer than an hour on for the webinar, but we do want to be thorough and giving you as much information as you can to help you with setting the stage for this year's application process. We'll now move into the any other additional questions. And by the way, so I think I forgot to mention that if you have questions, you can submit to our web. Hold on, let me back up and find that specific.
I could just, because it's wrong on there.
Oh, it is.
You got
Okay.
an extra letter.
No. The disadvantages of not seeing well sometimes here. Hold on.
So we
Okay.
have a designated email address for all questions as well as the applications to be submitted to, is what you were. going
Yes,
to say.
yes. So anybody's, first of all, the questions I think that we got today, of course, they will be posted on the recording. But if we can't answer the question today, we will try our best. If we can answer it, we'll put it on the website so everyone can see that. But if you have additional questions after today, you can submit it to this email address, and we will post all answers to those questions on our website so that everybody gets access to that same information. So did you go through the address?
It is, do you want to?
Yeah, if you want to type it in the chat box. So we'll put it in the chat box while we're receiving questions. So Elmer,
Okay, there is, Heidi Villa has a question. When you say then, it is okay to repeat the same information in more than one area. A bit of redundancy, could it make it more clear?
so I would suggest that based on using your best judgment, you don't want to be completely redundant where you're just using that like copy paste, but yes, sometimes that is helpful when you're, when we're looking at 15 pages of information, just like today's presentation, there's a lot of information. Some of the things I repeated constantly because it was important. I'd say try not to be, redundant in the sense of where it's repeated 16, 18 times, but at least to get the most important points that you feel needing to be reemphasized, I would say, I think that's a wise move.
All right, Heidi, let us know if that answered your question. There's one more question from Boyd. Are the grant funds to be invoiced on only a passenger trip basis, or are there other approved invoicing formats?
Do you want to answer that? Do you know what, are you?
Passenger trip, a passenger mile, trip, a mile, or a combination of trip and mile. It's not gonna be a revenue hour or route or anything such like that.
It's similar to the,
Just like the
it's
trip
just
and-
like the trip and equipment grant.
Okay, I don't hear anything. Are you guys quiet?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Elmer, on the next one.
That's it. That's it. That's it for now.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. Kelly has a question. Go ahead,
Sure,
Kelly.
sure. We'll keep the lines open for a few more minutes, just in case if there's thinking, and go ahead,
Go
Kelly.
ahead, Kelly. Unmute yourself, Kelly.
Okay, so my question has to do with match. Like for our service area, when we do the county 10% match, the local match. Now, in that budget letter that I submit to them, I would include a paragraph, in case we are awarded this grant, this would be the match for it. Is that something that I could submit with my application, the actual budget letter to the county, or are you looking for something else?
You could submit that, or you could say that the county would provide the match if awarded.
Okay, okay.
Any other
I think that's it.
questions?
I think that's it for now. Go ahead and move on.
All right, well, I guess one last thing is there, if there's just to make, recognize that if our advisors or Commissioner Tellez, if you guys are on, thank you for taking your time. These are folks, again, that are, they have busy other schedules, they have other jobs, and they take time each year to go through these proposals. It takes quite a lot of time to go through it and thoroughly review it. So we do want to thank y'all for continuing to serve in this role, this capacity. We look forward, so the next big event is March 15th. That is the scheduled commission meeting here in Tallahassee. We will provide more information about the time of when those presentations will occur, and provide any guidance that needs to be provided as far as the presenters go. But we encourage those of you who are not ISD grant project recipients to also be there, because it might give you a chance to think of some ideas of your own. If you want to see an idea that's going on in another community and you're interested in that, that's your opportunity to hear about it and consider that as part of your development. So anything else? All right. Well, thank you all. We will sign off and look forward to seeing everyone who is going to be here at the Capitol on March 15th. Thank you.